Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If it is your first time seeing me, hi, my name is G. I'm a British foreigner who currently lives in Seoul, South Korea. And today I thought it would be fun to react to some fellow expat in Korea content. Because I suffer with chronic doom scrolling, I'm going to start off on TikTok. As always, I mean no bad will or hate towards any of the content creators that I react to in this video.
This is why teaching in Korea kind of sucks and why I'm leaving. First of all, when you come to Korea, you have two options: public school or hagwon, which is private academy. But both are a gamble when it comes to schools, co-workers, living conditions.
As a fellow former English teacher in Korea, I really want to give my opinion on this one. Immediately, she is 100% right. Whatever school you end up at is a huge gamble indeed with how strict or laid back your fellow co-workers are going to be. With the EPIC program, when I applied at least back in 2018, your chances of getting placed in Seoul were extremely low. You were pretty much guaranteed to not get Seoul, honestly. I got placed in Gyeonggi-do, which is the area surrounding Seoul, which I think happens to a lot of people who initially apply to Seoul. When they don't get into Seoul, then they get placed in the surrounding area. So even EPIC is a bit of a gamble, honestly, in terms of your school. And living conditions is a huge one too, because some of the school-provided apartments in Korea are notorious for being awful. Some of the apartments here that they give to English teachers are... I got a little bit unlucky with my apartment. My apartment had a very big issue with mold, which is a very, very common problem in Korean apartments. And yeah, that unfortunately was the case for me. My first ever school-provided apartment here in Korea was mold-ridden. Someone did come out to fix the issue. I say fix because really all that happened was a guy came out, looked at the mold, sprayed some stuff on the wall, and then just repapered the wall, which obviously didn't fix the problem because the mold came back and just destroyed the new wallpaper that had been put there. So
Teaching abroad is great for a couple years or so. It's not sustainable for a lifetime career, in my opinion. You won't save up as much money as you think you will, and you can't move up.
Yeah.
After a few years, you'll typically be at that cap for how much money you can make here, and you'll never be able to move past that unless you move to a hagwon.
Yes, that's true. EPIC in general doesn't pay as much money as hagwons do. I still would 100% recommend that you still come with the EPIC program over risking a hagwon, just because hagwons are a complete horror show for the most part. Everyone I knew in Korea who worked at a hagwon, including myself, had god-awful experiences, so I would never want to recommend working at a hagwon. But EPIC do not pay as much money as I feel like they should pay English teachers, honestly. The last time I checked the EPIC pay grade, it's the exact same today as it was when I taught with the EPIC program back in 2018. The cost of living has gone up here, but the wages for EPIC teachers has remained the same.
Unless you move to a hagwon, but then again, that is an even bigger gamble than public school. And I would say I've heard way more horror stories than success stories.
Yes,
when you live in
exactly,
Korea or abroad in general, you have to have a visa sponsor. So whatever workplace is sponsoring your visa, they are essentially your lifeline. And they have the power to make your life as happy or as miserable as they want it to be.
Yep, 100%. That is the massive downside to being an English teacher here, especially if you go the hagwon route. Personally, I had a pretty good experience with my EPIC school other than the living conditions. Everything else about that job was really good. My co-workers, thankfully, were really nice. But my hagwon was a completely different story. My hagwon was an absolute shit show. It's 100% true that these companies will hold your visa over your head. They will treat you like absolute shit because they know that your visa is tied to your workplace. And so if you want to quit your job, you have to leave the country or get another job. But in order to do that, they have to give you a letter of release. And if they want to be really shitty about it, which 9 times out of 10, if you want to quit the job, they are going to be shitty about it, then they won't give you that release letter. And so you're just going to have to leave the country, which they know you don't want to do. So they have full power over you.
So things are not as cheap here as you think they are. I've actually found Korea to be pretty expensive, even just basic groceries, especially if you live alone. You'll notice a lot of people here don't even buy groceries because you're dishing out so much money for fresh food that immediately goes bad if you don't eat it.
Food in Korea is pretty damn expensive, actually, especially meats and fresh fruit. Those are incredibly expensive, especially compared to the UK.
Also, the longer you stay in Korea, the harder it will be to integrate back into your home country society. And when you're here, you don't have the freedom of using vacation whenever you want. So you will miss all holidays for the most part, all kinds of events. You can visit home once a year if you're lucky.
Oh my God, this was a huge thing for me when I was in Korea teaching. With Epic, you usually get more vacation days than you do when you work at a Hagwon. If I remember correctly, when I did Epic, we got 18 days vacation. All of my fellow Korean co-workers, they all had the entire summer and winter break off, whereas the English teachers all had to only have 1 or 2 weeks off during this period, and the rest of the time they still had to go into the school and just sit at their desks. At the Hagwon, you get even less vacation. I believe I only had 10 days vacation. Again, this was dictated by the school. We couldn't go to the school and say, hey, I would like to have this day off. That wasn't allowed. You weren't allowed to choose your own holidays. You can't just decide to go home for birthdays, for Christmas. So you end up missing a lot of family events.
You can visit home once a year if you're lucky. But each time you go home, you'll notice your family getting older. And it's depressing because you're just continuously missing so much.
I relate so much to all of this. I still think this is the absolute hardest thing about living abroad, let alone just living in Korea, just living away from your family. This is by far the hardest adjustment that you have to come to terms with. It feels like you're missing out on so much of their lives, and there's just an immense amount of guilt that also comes with that, I think. Feeling like you're choosing to miss out on these really important events in your family's lives. I think this is the absolute hardest thing about living abroad, honestly.
And you'll never be respected like Korean teachers or taken as seriously as Korean teachers because you are the foreigner.
Yeah, that's true too. When I worked at my Epic school, there were numerous occasions where a teacher would come into my classroom and just tell me like, hey, no English class today. English class is cancelled today. And I'd be like, oh, okay, is there like a reason for that? And they'd always just be like, oh no, just no English class today. And I was like, oh, well, all the other classes were going ahead as planned, but for some reason on certain days, teachers would just cancel my English class. And I'd be like, well, I'll just sit here and drink my tea, I guess. The English class was kind of the class that wasn't really taken very seriously by the school, and it was the class that would often just get cancelled for no reason so that the kids could do something else with their time. That's what it seemed like to me, at least, that the school weren't really taking me or my classes very seriously.
And even if you stay here and marry a Korean and become successful in whatever business, you'll still never be fully accepted by Korean society. Korea is a 95% homogenous country, so you will never be seen as equal to other Koreans. You will always be seen as less than. You'll always just be the foreigner.
It's always important, I think, to remind people of this, because I do think that people have some sort of idea in their head that they will be welcomed into Korean society as long as they speak Korean fluently and they understand Korean culture on a deep level. Then they will be accepted into Korean society and seen as equal to Koreans. And unfortunately, that just isn't the case. The other thing that kind of ties into this, which I found myself getting a little bit bogged down by initially, was there's a lot of staring that comes with being a foreigner in Korea too. You will always stand out as a foreigner here, and I think that also ties into feeling like an outsider, because you're also made aware that you're an outsider very often through the staring.
Of course, you can marry a Korean to stay, but I've seen way more dysfunctional than functional relationships and marriages between the foreigners and Koreans here. Like, I would say 80% of couples have a lot of issues behind closed doors, whether it's cheating or abuse. And then if you get married to this person, they become your lifeline in Korea.
This part I cannot speak on because I'm fortunate enough to be in a healthy marriage. I think What also helps with mine and my husband's relationship, however, is that he is very westernized. If he were more Korean, then maybe we would have more issues in our relationship. Because he is westernized, we share a lot of the same beliefs and opinions on things, and the things that we do disagree on, we can communicate with each other healthily over. In general, we can communicate really well and in a very healthy way with each other, which again, I think is helped by the fact that he isn't Korean, and we communicate with each other primarily in English, which is my native language. However, yes, I do think that there are many relationships in Korea that probably are toxic, and couples who do struggle with cultural differences. This one is probably even worse than having your job be your lifeline in Korea. Having another person be your lifeline in Korea, that is an absolutely terrifying position to be in. If you are in a relationship that is less than ideal, or is putting a real strain on your mental health. Because when I had my hagwon job in Korea, and that was my lifeline in Korea, I was so miserable and so stressed out because I wanted to stay in Korea, but I knew that that was my way of staying in Korea, and it was making me more and more depressed. And I can only imagine that that is intensified like by 100 times if it's actually tied to a person rather than a job. Getting a divorce in Korea is also a very, very, very complicated process, and having to navigate all of that when you're the foreigner and they're the Korean who actually knows all of the laws and the rules, and they're the only one who really can navigate it to the best of their ability, and you're kind of not really knowing what's going on because of the language barrier. That situation sounds like an absolute nightmare situation to be in, and I would not wish that upon anybody.
Because you're the foreigner and they're the Korean, and there will always be that power imbalance. It's really easy to get stuck in a toxic marriage here with cheating or I've heard this story time and time again. And when you want to get out, you're stuck, babe. This isn't your home country. Authorities will side with the Korean 99.9% of the time.
There's also this to contend with. 9 times out of 10, Korean authorities will side with the Korean person. I've seen it time and time again in Korea.
No matter what. And there are so many amazing things about Korea, and teaching here or going to school here is an incredible opportunity. But I'd say for like maybe 2 years max. I've been here 4 years and I'm leaving after this contract ends, and
100% teaching in Korea was the best decision I ever made in my life. I will never regret the decision to come here to teach English. It taught me so many things about myself, and it was such a wonderful opportunity. If you're coming to teach English here, like 2 years is probably good. That's how I felt too. I did my first year with Epic, completed my contract, and I was like, okay, I want to try and live in Seoul. Now that I have taught English and realized that I enjoyed the job enough to want to do it for another year, I really wanted to try and live in Seoul. That was always my dream when I came to Korea, was I really wanted to live in Seoul. And so my second year, I was like, I'll apply directly to a hagwon in Seoul, then I'm guaranteed to get Seoul. Like, I can't not get Seoul in that scenario. However, even going into this contract, before I knew I was getting in real deep into some shit that I did not expect, I felt in my heart that this was going to be my last year in Korea regardless. I enjoyed my first year. Now I want to experience a hagwon in Seoul, experience the life that I actually wanted to live before I got placed in my Epic school, living the dream. So I thought, we all know how that turned out. And then I was out. I would fly home to the UK. My plan just came a little sooner than I thought it would because my second job ended up being an absolute nightmare. I just ended up leaving the country even sooner than I thought I would. Teaching English in Korea is definitely a dead-end job. It does not have any room for progression or pay rises. So I think that 2 years is the perfect amount of time.
There's also not as much to do here as people make it seem like it is online. Korea is a really small country. Like, I did almost everything I wanted to do within my first 2 years here, and that was even during COVID. And I know there are people who come to Korea to settle their lives because they don't feel like they have a life they loved back home. And I totally understand and empathize with you. But for others, a lot of times, the grass is greener back home, but you just can't see that until you leave it all behind.
I've already mentioned this in a previous video, but I think the fact that Korea is so over-romanticized online has people thinking that when they come to this country, they are going to have a completely different life than they were living back home. They kind of see Korea as this promised land. That's the mindset. Like, if I can only get to Korea, then my life will be perfect. Then my life will be so much better than it is right now. And then, as she mentioned, they actually realize living here comes with a whole set of other crap that is equally as difficult, if not more difficult, than what I had to deal with back home. And then suddenly you're like, oh, maybe, just maybe, my hometown and my life in my home country wasn't that bad after all.
Here for language school or whatever, and that's great, but hot take, I know. I think putting all that effort into becoming fluent in a language would make way more sense if it was a more universal language. Like, you can only ever use Korean in Korea. Why not put that effort and energy into learning Spanish or French or Arabic, languages you can use in multiple countries, not just one? Of course, you should learn the basics of Korean, and you should learn how to read Hangul, to be respectful, of course.
I think this is the only thing that she says that I actually disagree with. You can only use Korean in Korea. That is true. However, I think if you're living in Korea, if you don't know how to speak Korean, you're going to have a very tough time. In my experience, it's not easy at all to live here when you don't know the language. Like, my first year in Korea, I really struggled because I only knew like 3 words of Korean when I first moved here. I think it's definitely worth putting the effort into learning the language if you enjoy the language itself anyway. I personally like the Korean language anyway, and I do watch a lot of Korean media. For me, it would always be a no-brainer to learn the Korean language because I enjoy Korean media. On top of that, obviously, I married into a Korean family. I've always thought that learning the Korean language was also just a sign of respect for them. I do not regret my decision to spend time learning Korean at all. I think that it's time well spent, and I will continue to spend time learning Korean until hopefully one day I am entirely comfortable in the language, because I'm not quite there yet. Even though I don't plan on living in Korea forever, I don't think I'll ever regret the effort and the time I spent learning the Korean language. I too would never, ever, ever regret my decision to teach English here, as I said, but it is definitely a dead-end job that I think can suck people in and they can just stay here because they get comfortable. One thing that I would like to add on to that, though, is that I don't think that you should come to teach English in Korea full stop if you're not at least interested in teaching. I know that sounds like duh, obviously, but there are a lot of people that I met here who came as English teachers just because they wanted to live in Korea. But after leaving university, I knew a lot of people who were going on to do teaching degrees after they got their initial degree. I and ahed over it, and then I was like, do I really want to spend like another year studying? At that point, I was so over studying. Like, I found my degree incredibly stressful. I don't really think I have it in me to do more studying right now. Like, I just want to be done with studying. And then I came across teaching English and ESL teaching. And when I realized you could do that in Korea, I was like, oh my God, perfect. Like, I can do both at the same time. So I did have a genuine interest in being a teacher.
Okay, I saw a certain TikToker inviting people to come teach English in Korea. This person is not Korean. I'm gonna be a little rude here. To preface this, yes, I have 2 degrees in education. My first degree, bachelor's degree, is in teaching English as a second language. My other bachelor's degree is just a standard English education degree. How do I begin this politely? Do not come to Korea. Do not go abroad to teach English if you are not 100% dedicated to doing your job as an English teacher.
Yeah, 100%. Do not come here if you are not committed to being a teacher, because the kids deserve more than a tourist, which is essentially what most of these people coming to teach are. They deserve someone who wants to put the time and effort into teaching them English. That is why you're coming to the country. That is your job.
These teacher tourists have already ruined so many things for actual teachers in Korea. For example, we cannot adopt pets in Korea. It is extremely hard to adopt a pet because teacher tourists come to this country for 1 year, say, oh, I'm lonely, adopt a pet, and then drop that pet off when they leave the country.
Yeah, 100%. I actually knew a girl who did this. Really sad to say that she was a fellow Brit. I went to grab coffee with her one day and she was like, oh, I'm thinking of getting a puppy. What do you think? And I was like, oh, wow, that's a pretty huge commitment. Are you sure you want to get a puppy? Thought you said that you were planning on leaving Korea after a couple years. And then she's like, oh no, I decided I actually want to stay in Korea forever. That's a huge, huge decision that you've just suddenly made seemingly on a whim. She asked for my opinion. I gave it a straight up. I said, I don't think it's a good idea. The next time I met her, she was like, oh, I got a puppy. And I was like, she was like a textbook example of one of those friends who they ask for your advice and then you give them your advice and then they go on to do the complete opposite thing of what you actually recommend they do. I eventually came to my senses and realized that this person was a terrible person, and so I fell out of touch with her. So unfortunately, I actually don't know what happened to the puppy. I hope that she did the right thing. I say the right thing. The right thing would have been to not get the damn dog in the first place. I pray that she actually did the next right thing, which would have been to put the dog up for adoption, and she didn't just abandon it, but I honestly don't know.
You are only in this country to teach and to work for the school. That's literally the point of your visa. It's a work visa. You can only work at your school with that visa. Do not come here as a year-long tourist. You will have a terrible time in this country because the ones that are already here do not want another foreign worker that's going to run away at midnight at the first sign of stress.
The only thing with his rant that I don't agree with is people having to do midnight runs, because I don't think that that necessarily always comes from people not being prepared to be teachers. I think midnight runs happen because some people are genuinely treated like absolute scum, and that is a different situation entirely. Like, yes, of course, if someone comes here and then they get hit in the face with the reality that they have to teach, and that's the reason why they do a midnight run, then yes, absolutely. I 100% agree that that is wrong. However, some people do midnight runs because hagwons literally are not paying them for months. Some people do midnight runs because their hagwon director has been physically or verbally abusive towards them. Some people do midnight runs because the hagwons that they end up working at are absolute hellholes. I do think that sometimes midnight runs are not the fault of the individual, but the fault of the hagwons themselves. For the most part, I agree with him. I don't think that you should come here to teach English if your intention is to essentially just be a year-long tourist. I 100% agree with that sentiment. I thought it would be really fun to just take a little trip down memory lane and see how expats in Korea are getting on in the teaching environment, considering, like I said, I myself am a former English teacher here. If you are genuinely interested in coming to teach English in Korea and you genuinely want to be a teacher in Korea, I recommend you go through the EPIC program. It's just a lot more safe and has a lot more job security for you, I would say. You're much less likely to be fucked over at an EPIC school/public school. That would be my recommendation. But again, only if you are genuinely interested in teaching. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching this video. Please like the video if you like the video. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you in my next one. Bye guys!